I've always been a nervous flyer, but until this happened, I never had a reason to believe anything truly bad could happen on a plane. Turbulence, delays, crying babies, I could handle all of that. What happened on a flight from Dallas to Seattle 3 years ago is the reason I still glance at every cabin door whenever I fly. The flight left Dallas a little after 10 p.m. It was a normal overnight trip and everything felt routine. The boarding process was smooth, the weather was decent, and the captain even mentioned that the flight should be relatively uneventful except for some turbulence expected later over the Rocky Mountains. I settled into my window seat in row 18, put on my headphones, and planned to sleep through most of the flight. About 2 hours after takeoff, the cabin had become quiet. Most passengers were asleep, and the lights had been dimmed. I had just finished watching a movie and was starting to drift off when the first strong wave of turbulence hit. The aircraft shook hard enough to wake several people, and the seatbelt sign immediately illuminated above our heads. The flight attendants quickly stopped their service and returned to their jump seats. At first, nobody seemed concerned. Turbulence is common, and most passengers simply tightened their seatbelts and waited for it to pass. However, a few minutes later, I heard a strange metallic sound from somewhere behind me. It sounded like a heavy latch being moved. I didn't think much of it until I heard the exact same noise again. This time, several passengers looked around. The sound seemed to be coming from one of the cabin doors near the rear section of the aircraft. I turned in my seat and noticed that a flight attendant was already staring in that direction. Her expression wasn't panicked, but she definitely looked concerned. A woman sitting across the aisle pointed toward the door and asked her husband if it looked different than before. I wasn't sure what she meant until I focused on it myself. The handle appeared slightly raised. It wasn't fully unlocked, but it definitely didn't look the way cabin doors normally do. One of the flight attendants walked toward it and examined it closely. The moment she got near the door, another metallic click echoed through the cabin. This time, there was no mistaking it. Everyone nearby heard it. The flight attendant immediately picked up a phone mounted on the wall and spoke quietly with someone, presumably the cockpit. Within a minute, a second crew member arrived. The two attendants stood near the door and exchanged worried looks. The turbulence continued shaking the aircraft, but nobody was paying attention to that anymore. Nearly every passenger who could see the door was staring at it. Then something happened that I still struggle to explain. The handle moved. Not suddenly, not because of turbulence, it slowly shifted upward by itself. I remember seeing the first flight attendant immediately step backward. Her face went pale. A few passengers gasped, while others assumed they were imagining things. I wanted to believe there was some mechanical explanation, but the movement looked deliberate, almost as if someone was turning the handle from the other side. The captain's voice came over the intercom a few moments later. He calmly instructed everyone to remain seated with their seatbelts fastened, but there was something unusual about his tone. He sounded nervous. As the announcement ended, a loud thud struck the door. The entire cabin jumped. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Every eye was fixed on the door. Then another impact hit, even louder than before. It sounded as though something heavy had slammed directly against the outside of the aircraft. A child began crying several rows ahead of me. One passenger stood up and demanded to know what was happening, but the crew ignored him. They seemed completely focused on the door. The third impact was the worst. The sound echoed through the cabin, followed by another slow movement of the handle. That was the moment real panic began. People weren't whispering anymore. You could hear breathing getting heavier all around the cabin. A few passengers unbuckled slightly just to look over seats, while others stayed completely frozen, staring at the door like it might explode open at any second. The flight attendants moved closer together near the aisle, speaking urgently into their headsets. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language made it clear something was seriously wrong. One of them kept glancing toward the cockpit door, then back at the cabin door, like she was waiting for instructions that weren't coming fast enough. Then everything went quiet again. Not normal quiet. The engines were still running, the plane was still moving, but the turbulence suddenly stopped. The shaking that had been going on for almost an hour just disappeared. That silence made it worse, because now there was nothing to distract from the door. And that's when I noticed the window on it. It was one of those small oval cabin door windows, slightly fogged from the freezing air outside. At first I thought I was imagining it, but the frost on the glass seemed to be changing, slowly clearing in one spot, like something warm had been pressed right up against it from the outside. I leaned forward without even realizing I was doing it. There was a shape, not clear at first, just a darker outline against the night sky. Then it became more defined. It looked like a head, human-shaped, standing right outside the plane at cruising altitude. I remember my stomach dropping so fast it felt like the plane had suddenly lost altitude. I blinked, trying to reset my vision, trying to convince myself it was just condensation or a trick of the light. But then I saw movement. The shape shifted slightly, as if it had turned its head toward the window, like it was looking directly inside. A few seconds passed, and I noticed something even worse. One of the other passengers, a man a few rows ahead, had stood up completely still. He wasn't speaking, just staring at the same door. His face was pale, and I could tell he had seen it too. That's when he finally said it out loud. "I saw it. I saw something out there." That's all it took. The cabin broke into chaos. People started asking questions at once, some crying, some demanding the crew do something, others just praying out loud. But the flight attendants didn't respond to the passengers. They stayed locked in place near the door, as if their entire focus was keeping it shut no matter what. The captain's voice finally came over the intercom again. This time, it didn't sound calm at all. He said there had been a technical issue, and we would be diverting for an unscheduled landing. He didn't explain anything else, and his voice cut off almost immediately after. Nobody believed it was just a technical issue. Not after what we had all just seen. For the rest of the flight, nobody relaxed. The plane stayed steady, but every sound suddenly felt louder. Every small movement near that door made people flinch. Even the flight attendants avoided looking at it directly unless they had to. And strangely, the handle never moved again. It stayed perfectly still, like whatever had been trying to open it had stopped, or was waiting. When we finally started descending, the atmosphere inside the cabin didn't improve. The landing itself was normal, smooth, almost too normal for what had just happened. But the second the plane touched down, everyone stood up at once. No one waited for instructions. No one cared about seatbelt signs or announcements. It was like the entire cabin just needed to get off that aircraft as fast as possible. I remember grabbing my bag and walking down the aisle without looking back. I didn't want to see that door again. I didn't want to confirm anything. But right before I stepped out, I made the mistake of glancing over my shoulder. The cabin door looked completely normal, just a locked piece of metal, no signs of anything wrong. And that somehow made it worse, because I still remember what I saw outside it, and I still can't explain how something could stand at 30,000 feet without falling away into the sky.